Welcome to Life Stories, where we share the most compelling and transformative tales. Today, we bring you the story of Richard Callaway, a once powerful CEO whose empire was stolen by his own daughter. Betrayed, poisoned, and cast aside, Richard finds himself on the streets with nothing left, except the will to survive. Join us as we follow his journey of redemption, uncovering shocking truths and finding unexpected allies along the way. Will Richard reclaim his life and his company? Or is it too late? Subscribe to the channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. For most of my life, I believed that control was everything. If you played your pieces right, if you moved with precision and foresight, nothing could take you down. That was how I built Callaway Industries, from a modest startup to one of the most powerful corporations in America. People respected me, feared me, and I thought I had secured my legacy, ensuring my name would be spoken with reverence long after I was gone. But life, as it turns out, does not care about strategy. At first, it was just fatigue, nothing I hadn't dealt with before. Long days, late nights, the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. I dismissed the dizziness, the trembling hands, the heavy feeling in my chest as mere exhaustion. Stress. I told myself, a man like me didn't have time for sickness. Then, the symptoms grew worse. My vision blurred when I tried to read reports. A persistent nausea crept up on me during board meetings. Sleep became elusive, and when I did sleep, I woke up feeling worse than before. The worst part was the weakness. A suffocating, soul-crushing weakness that I could not shake off. For the first time in my life, I was powerless. And in my absence, my daughter, Vanessa, stepped in. At first, I thought it was out of duty, out of love. After all, she had always been ambitious, always eager to prove herself. She had inherited my sharp mind, my calculated approach to business. But there was something else in her, something colder, harder, a hunger not just to succeed, but to dominate. She started making decisions on my behalf. Restructuring the company, cutting costs. I heard whispers of layoffs. People I had known for years suddenly gone, replaced by younger, cheaper workers. Even my most trusted employees seemed wary, their gazes shifting when I entered a room. But I was too sick to fight back, too sick to even ask the right questions. I convinced myself that Vanessa was only doing what needed to be done, that she was simply ensuring the company's survival. That once I recovered, I would step back into my rightful place. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if she doesn't want me to recover?" The thought was absurd. Paranoia. Surely, she was my daughter. I had given her everything. She wouldn't. Would she? Then came the pills. Vanessa insisted on handling my medication herself. She would sit by my bedside, watching closely as I swallowed each pill. Her voice soft, reassuring. "It's for your own good, Dad," she would say. "You'll feel better soon." But I didn't feel better. I felt worse. And then, one night, a boy I had never seen before burst into my hospital room. His eyes wild with urgency. He couldn't have been older than 17. His clothes worn, his hair unkempt. He looked like he had just stepped in from the streets. "Don't take the medicine your daughter gives you," he shouted. Security dragged him away before I could react. I sat there, stunned. Vanessa appearing moments later, her face a mask of concern. "That was Jason," she explained with a sigh. "A troubled kid. He works as a janitor at the company. I don't know how he got in here. But don't listen to him. He's just confused." She stroked my hand. "You trust me, don't you, Dad?" And of course, I did. Didn't I? Yet that night, I couldn't sleep. The boy's words echoed in my mind. What if he was right? What if my own daughter, my own flesh and blood, was the reason I was growing weaker by the day? The idea was too painful to accept. But it was also impossible to ignore. Doubt is a cruel thing. It gnaws at you, creeping into the spaces between logic and love. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept circling back to the boy, Jason. His voice, desperate, urgent, refusing to leave me in peace. What if he was telling the truth? I had always trusted Vanessa. I had raised her, provided for her, given her everything she could ever need. Surely, she would never betray me. Surely, she wouldn't poison me. The very thought was grotesque. But as I stared at the row of pills on my nightstand, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: fear. The next morning, I made a decision. I would stop taking the medication. At first, I did it carefully, subtly. I held the pills under my tongue, waiting for Vanessa to leave the room before spitting them into a napkin. Days passed, and something remarkable happened. I began to feel clearer. The dizziness eased. My limbs felt less like dead weight. And Vanessa noticed. One evening, she sat beside me, watching me closely as I sipped the tea she had brought me. "You seem stronger today," she remarked, her tone light, but there was something behind it, something sharp. I forced a weak smile. "Maybe I'm getting better." She studied me, her fingers drumming lightly against the wooden arm of the chair. "That's good," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. That night, I barely slept. I could feel the shift, the unspoken tension between us. And then, in the early hours of the morning, I heard her on the phone. "He's resisting the medication," she whispered. "We might need a stronger dose." A chill ran through me. There was no longer any doubt. I had to leave, summoning what little strength I had. I forced myself out of bed, my limbs trembling with the effort. I dressed slowly, each movement labored, every step a battle. By the time I reached the door, my heart was hammering in my chest. The hallway was dark, silent. My mind screamed at me to hurry. But my body was sluggish, weakened from months of sedation. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. Then I heard footsteps. I ducked into a side corridor just as Vanessa's voice echoed through the hallway. "He won't suspect anything. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." A pause. "Greg, just make sure the paperwork is in order. Once he's gone, Callaway Industries is mine." I felt as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. She had already signed everything over. My company, my life's work. Vanessa had taken it all. I clenched my fists, fury momentarily pushing back the exhaustion. I couldn't collapse now. I had to keep moving. With what little strength I had left, I made my way out of the house, into the freezing Chicago night. Alone. Chicago at night is a cruel place. The winter wind cut through me like a blade, seeping into my bones, reminding me of just how fragile I had become. I had spent my life in high-rise offices, in chauffeur-driven cars, in the warmth of five-star hotels. Now, for the first time, I stood on the streets with nothing but the clothes on my back. I stumbled forward, my legs weak, my body still trembling from the months of poisoning. Every step felt like dragging a corpse uphill. The city blurred around me, glowing streetlights, honking taxis, the endless hum of a world that no longer belonged to me. I clung to the memory of what I had just heard. Vanessa's voice, cold and final. "Once he's gone, Callaway Industries is mine." She had taken everything. And worse, she had planned for me to never come back. I reached an alleyway and leaned against the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My heart pounded in my chest. Not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper: fear, anger, betrayal. The same daughter I had held in my arms as a baby, taught to ride a bike, watched graduate from college, had decided I was nothing more than an obstacle in her way. I felt a burning in my throat, rage, grief, or maybe just the icy wind tearing through my lungs. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed a plan. I needed someone who could help me. And then, as if fate had heard me, I saw him, a figure moving across the street, hands shoved deep in his worn-out hoodie, hood pulled low over his face. He moved with the kind of cautious speed that only someone who had learned to survive on the streets possessed. Jason, the boy who had stormed into my hospital room, the boy I had dismissed as a troublemaker, a liar. He had tried to warn me, and I hadn't listened. Summoning what little strength I had, I pushed myself off the wall and stumbled toward him. "Jason," I called out, my voice hoarse. Barely more than a whisper. He stopped, turning to face me, eyes widening in shock. Mr. Calloway? He looked me up and down, my disheveled clothes, my sunken face, the sheer desperation I must have radiated. I swallowed my pride, the last thing I had left. I need your help. For a moment, Jason just stared at me. Then, slowly, he nodded. Come on, he said, his voice steady. I know where we can go. I followed him without question, my mind spinning, my body barely holding together. I had spent my entire life believing I had power, control, security. But tonight, for the first time, I was completely at someone else's mercy. And the only person willing to save me was the street kid I had ignored. Jason led me through the city's back streets, away from the neon-lit boulevards and glass towers, into the shadows where the forgotten lived. We moved in silence. I could feel his eyes flicking toward me now and then, as if trying to make sense of what had happened. I must have looked unrecognizable, disheveled, shivering, stripped of the power I once held. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at a small brick building with a faded sign above the door. St. Andrew's Shelter. Jason knocked twice, and after a moment, a woman opened the door. She was in her early 40s. Her auburn hair pulled back, her face lined with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent years helping others. Jason? She asked, her eyes narrowing. Then she looked at me. This is Richard Calloway, Jason said quickly. He needs help. The woman crossed her arms, scanning me with a sharp, assessing gaze. Richard Calloway? The billionaire? I let out a bitter laugh. Not anymore. She studied me for a moment longer, then sighed and stepped aside. Come in before you freeze to death. The warmth inside the shelter was jarring after the bitter cold. I stood there, taking it in. Rows of worn-out beds, the scent of soup in the air, murmured voices of people who had nowhere else to go. The woman led me to a chair near the fireplace. I'm Sarah Bennett, she said. I run this place, and I don't usually take in people like you. Jason smirked. Yeah, well, Mr. Calloway's not exactly himself right now. Sarah handed me a cup of hot tea, watching as I wrapped my frozen fingers around it. So, she said, are you going to tell me how a man who once owned half of Chicago ended up on my doorstep? I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Then, for the first time, I told the truth. About Vanessa, about the poisoning, about how I had ignored every warning sign. Too blind, too proud to believe my own daughter would betray me. When I finished, the silence stretched between us. Sarah let out a low whistle. Damn, she muttered. That's some Shakespearean tragedy right there. Jason leaned forward, his expression dark. I told you not to take the medicine. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who had risked his job, his safety, to warn me. The boy I had dismissed without a second thought. I should have listened to you, I admitted. Jason shrugged. Yeah, you should have. Then, after a beat, he added, but you're here now, and if you want to take Vanessa down, we need a plan. I nodded, my grip tightening around the cup. For the first time in months, my mind felt clear. I wasn't finished yet. For the first time in months, I felt something I had nearly forgotten, purpose. As I sat by the fire in St. Andrew's Shelter, sipping tea that warmed more than just my frozen fingers, I realized something. I had spent my life building an empire, calculating every move, ensuring that I was always in control. And yet, when it mattered most, I had let my own daughter take everything from me. But not anymore. I looked at Jason. He was leaning against the table, arms crossed, waiting for me to say something. Sarah, too, was watching me, her sharp gaze unreadable. These two strangers, people I would have ignored in another life, were now my only allies. I need to take my company back, I said finally. My voice was rough, but steady. Jason snorted. Yeah, no kidding. But how? Vanessa already owns it, right? I clenched my jaw. She thinks she does. But if I can prove she poisoned me, if I can show she forced me to sign over the company while I was drugged, it won't hold up in court. Sarah frowned. You're going to need solid evidence. Not just suspicions. Do you have anything? I shook my head. Nothing concrete. Just my word against hers. Jason sat up straighter. Then we get proof. I narrowed my eyes. How? He exchanged a glance with Sarah before turning back to me. I still have access to the building. Vanessa fired a lot of people. But not me. I'm too invisible for her to notice. I can look around. See if there's anything suspicious. Sarah nodded. That's a start. But you'll need more. Someone inside the company who isn't afraid to talk. That's when it hit me. Lydia Franklin. She had worked at Callaway Industries for nearly 2 decades, overseeing internal audits and company policies. If anyone knew where to find something incriminating, it would be her. She might be able to help. I said, but she's loyal to the company. Not me. I don't know if she'll believe I was set up. Sarah folded her arms. Then you need to give her a reason to believe you. I exhaled slowly. Lydia was my best chance. Jason clapped his hands together. All right, so I sneak into Callaway Industries. See what I can dig up. You find Lydia and convince her to help. And Sarah, well, you run the shelter, so I guess I'll make sure no one finds you while you're out there. She cut in. Vanessa thinks you're gone for good. If she finds out you're alive, she won't make the same mistake twice. The weight of her words settled between us. Vanessa had already tried to kill me once. I met their eyes, one by one, these strangers who had become my only chance. Let's bring her down. The next morning, I left the shelter with a hood pulled low over my face. The city was already awake. People rushing past me, unaware that I had once ruled over a world they barely noticed. It was strange, this feeling of being invisible, of walking among them without the weight of my name. For once, I wasn't Richard Callaway, the billionaire. I was just another man trying to survive. But survival wasn't enough. I needed to fight back. My destination was clear, Lydia Franklin. She had been with Callaway Industries for nearly 20 years. A woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She had never been the type to bow to anyone. Not even me. And that's exactly why I needed her now. When I reached her apartment, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. Would she believe me? Or would she slam the door in my face? The lock clicked. The door opened. Lydia stood there, her gaze narrowing as she took me in, unshaven, wearing borrowed clothes, looking nothing like the man she had once worked for. Richard, she said slowly, disbelief flickering across her face. I cleared my throat. I need your help. She didn't move, didn't speak, just studied me with the same calculating expression she had always worn in boardrooms. Then, finally, she sighed and stepped aside. You'd better come in. The apartment was neat, meticulous, just like her. I stood awkwardly in the center of the room as she crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. All right, she said, talk. And so, I told her everything. About Vanessa, about the poisoning, about the papers I had unknowingly signed under the influence of drugs. About how I had barely escaped with my life. When I finished, Lydia was silent. She turned away, walking to the window, staring out at the city below. I could see the battle waging inside her, the loyalty to the company she had worked so hard to protect. The disbelief that Vanessa, the woman she had trusted, could have done something so monstrous. Finally, she spoke. Do you have proof? Not yet, I admitted. That's why I came to you. She exhaled slowly. You're asking me to betray Vanessa. No, I said firmly. I'm asking you to do what's right. She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. All right, but if we do this, we do it carefully. If Vanessa really did this, she won't hesitate to destroy us both. A weight lifted off my chest. I had an ally. And now, it was time to act. As I left Lydia's apartment, I knew one thing for certain. This was a dangerous game. But I had nothing left to lose. The moment had arrived. The pieces had fallen into place. And there was no turning back. Lydia had infiltrated the company. Jason had gathered the evidence. And Sarah had kept everything running smoothly. Vanessa's empire, built on lies and betrayal, was about to come crashing down. As I stood there, watching Vanessa at her so-called charity event, a strange sense of calm washed over me. She was still playing the part of the perfect daughter, smiling for the cameras, fooling everyone who looked up to her. But she didn't know that her lies were about to be exposed. Not just to the world, but to everyone she had ever deceived. When the screen behind her flickered to life, showing her recorded confession, the room fell silent. Vanessa's face drained of color as her own words played out for everyone to hear. "I poisoned him," she had said, "but the old idiot escaped, and now I need to finish him off." The room erupted in shock. And before she could react, the police were already on their way. Vanessa's reign of manipulation and deceit came to an abrupt end, and as she was taken away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. She was my daughter, but she had made choices that would cost her everything. I turned to Jason and Lydia, the two people who had helped me when I had nothing left. "This is just the beginning," I said, finally feeling the weight of everything lifting. The empire was no longer in her hands. It was mine again, but more importantly, I had my life back. And now, I smiled, we rebuild. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more life-changing stories. See you in the next video.